Hi, I'm Paljor Dorji, more popularly known here in Bhutan as Dasho Benji, and today I'm going to read you a story from the Book of Tales of the Yeti by Kunzang Choden. The story we've selected today is The Greedy Hunter. The Greedy Hunter. Like the rest of the yak herders of Laya, Tenzing used to herd his animals at an altitude of almost 3,000 meters in the winter months. In the summer, he would ascend to altitudes as high as 4,500 meters. The yaks grazed in the meadows that were fringed with coniferous woodlands of fir, blue pine, and juniper. He allowed them to roam freely within the traditionally recognized boundaries. He lived so close to the Tibetan border that his animals were constantly wandering back and forth across the borders, and he followed them, quite oblivious to the international boundaries. Apart from his two sons, he had his yak dog. This huge and faithful Tibetan mastiff kept away the ferocious beasts that abound in the wilderness. With more than 60 animals and two strong sons to help him, Tenzing could lead a relatively easy life. But the Layabs say that he was a greedy man when they recount the tragic tale involving his death. One night, Tenzing was alone in his house, sitting by the hearth and warming himself, for he had just come in from the cold. It was snowing heavily outside. The sky was dark and ominous, the wind cold and brittle. As he sat in the warmth of his kitchen, his thought drifted to his sons who had taken 10 yaks laden with salt to Gasa to exchange against rice. He hoped the traders in Gasa wouldn't send the boys back, telling them to return for the rice after the following year's harvest. Suddenly he was jolted out of his reverie by the frantic barking of his dog. Tenzing peeped through the crack of the window shutters without opening them so that he could avoid the cold draught that would invade his home. He smiled with satisfaction, for in the bright moonlight he could see his faithful dog excitedly frightening off a predator. But suddenly the dog stopped barking and, drawing its tail between its hind legs, entered the porch, yelping and whimpering as if it had been hurt. Curious, Tenzing got up and walked to the kitchen, but as he was passing through the small storeroom outside the kitchen, he noticed that the shutters on the upper windows were open. No wonder it's so cold in here today, thought Tenzing as he went to close them. However, just before his hands touched the shutters, two dark hairy paws appeared through the windows. "Oh, the lamas and my deities, you who know everything, I take refuge in you," thought Tenzing, as he stared at the monstrously huge hands that remained transfixed, as if expecting something. His mind went blank. His cries for help died somewhere between the pit of his stomach and his throat. The hairy paws continued to remain in the window. He looked around the room and saw the strips of yak meat that he had hung up to dry only a few days before. He quickly grabbed a bundle of meat and thrust it into the outstretched hands. The hands withdrew, and he could hear a great shuffling noise. The dog began to yelp and whine again. Tenzing could not move. He stood next to the window, not even daring to look at the retreating creature. Finally, when he did look out, he saw a huge being limping away into the thick forest of conifers at the far end of the pasture. Tenzing could not sleep a wink that night. He stacked his heaviest boxes against the door and wedged logs of wood in the window frames so that the shutters could not be forced open. He got up at dawn, Dazed and exhausted like a sick man getting out of bed after a long illness. He wondered if he should walk over to his neighbors on the other side of the mountain and talk to them about his experience. Would they believe him? Would they call him an old fool and laugh behind his back? He decided he had to talk to somebody. It must be a Migoi, a Yeti. They are known to come down to our human settlements during bad weather, and if it was limping, it must either be sick or injured, said Dechen, the 90-year-old grandmother in the neighbor's house, after she had patiently listened to his story. She said this as if she was talking to someone she knew very well. Almost as an afterthought, she said, "Be very careful not to bother it." Somehow, just knowing what it was seemed to calm Tenzing's confused and tormented state. Yet, for several nights, he took the same precautions of fortifying his house. But the so-called Migoi Yeti did not come. Then suddenly, one night, long after the first incident, his dog began to bark in that strange way. First the furious barking, and then the yelping and whimpering. Tenzing waited with bated breath until he could actually hear the footsteps of the giant. Thud, shuffle, thud, shuffle. They came closer and closer. And then the shutters opened. The logs of wood in the window frame snapped like twigs. So much for his fortification. All at once, he was overcome with terror. He took down a bundle of meat and placed it in the grisly, hairy hands. Clasping the meat with the long paw-like hands, the creature at once withdrew. This time Tenzing studied the beast. It was an enormous figure, standing on its hind legs. It was bigger than a yadon, or one of those huge, big Himalayan bears known as yak bears. Its shoulders sloped downwards, and its arms hung loosely by its sides. In the dark night, Tenzing could not see the color of its coat. It looked like a dark mass of shaggy fur. The creature walked with a thud, shuffle, thud, shuffle, because it had an injured leg. It put one good leg forward, thud, and then dragged the bad one forth with a shuffle. It walked silently into the dark night. "I believe you. It must be so," said Grandmother Dechen, in between her chants over the creaking noise of her prayer wheel, when Tenzing went to fill her in on the latest happenings. The visits of the begging Migoi Yeti were becoming a ritual. Even the dog no longer responded to its periodic appearances by barking. Instead, it would ignore the Migoi and lie with its face down between its front paws. In the meantime, Tenzing began to have some strange ideas. "If I can kill this creature and take parts of it to Punakha and present it to the king, I will surely become famous. And perhaps the king will favor me so well that I can gain a lot of power and control in Laya. I will then be a very rich man." This idea haunted him endlessly, and finally he made up his mind. As the usual time of the Migoi visits approached, he took his big axe and heated it in the hearth. The red-hot weapon would surely be better than an ordinary axe to kill this extraordinary creature with, he reasoned. Slowly the metal turned fiery hot, but the Migoi did not come. He let the axe lie in the fire. The metal was beginning to assume an ashen glow, when suddenly the window opened. Tenzing tried to calm himself and behave as if everything was normal. He took the axe by the handle and removed it from the fire. Even the wooden handle was so hot that he could barely hold it. The hairy hands were in the window as usual when he raised the axe over his shoulder, high above his head, and brought it down with one sweeping movement onto the giant hands. There was a horrible howl, and then darkness descended upon Tenzing. A few days later, Tenzing's sons returned from Punakha, their yaks carrying bags filled to bursting capacity with good rice and chilies. They were rather surprised when the dog did not bark and prance around, wagging its tail in its usual friendly greeting, and were truly shocked when they saw their house destroyed beyond recognition. They groped and stumbled among the rubble and the debris of what was once their home. Finally, they saw their father. There he was, his mangled but still recognizable body lying face down, crushed under the central beam of the house. His body lay squashed on the floor, and in his outstretched hand he still held the axe, the metal blackened by the heat, and the wooden handle scorched. The dog lay at a distance, its limbs torn wide apart. They quietly sat down next to their father's body in grief and shock. When the news of the mysterious death of Tenzing reached the ears of grandmother Dechen, she knew at once he must have done something silly to anger the Migoi. She alone realized that the supernatural being had destroyed the foolish man and his house with its mysterious powers, and then disappeared without a trace, taking with it the secret of its very existence. The rest of the villagers could only guess what the cause of the herder's unexpected death might be. The end.